City Image.
And I put it down for the image of my city. Why me put it down for the image of my city?
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? You are now listening to the City Image Podcast. Glad to be back with you guys again for another episode. It is Bryant, the theological giant, and I have my friends in the building. Let them know who you are.
It is Young Nassau County.
Brother, good to see you again. How you doing? How's life treating you?
Hanging in there, man. Hanging in there.
That's good. Around the table we got
Varlene the Wild Thornberry.
Varlene the Wild Thornberry back to us. She's a regular now.
Yeah.
Getting used to the sound of her voice, bringing that energy.
What up?
What up? Yo, but we got a fourth person.
Oh, hey, y'all, hey. It's Florida, the principal, a.k.a. the woman with principal. What's up?
Hey, she got like her own tagline. I need like Brian the Theological Giant, a.k.a. the Theological... Nah, I need something like extra with it now because she took it to another level. But glad to be with you guys again, man. I hope you guys are having a blessed season. We're entering into that Thanksgiving season, Christmas season. Lots to be thinking about, thankful for. So praying God be with you guys. We got a very dope episode lined up. We're going to be talking about the ever interesting realm of dating and relationships. What sparked this is Joshua Harris. Don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he is a Christian author who came to fame very young in his life, in his early 20s. He wrote a best-selling book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And recently he put out a statement recanting the book, totally disavowing it, and not necessarily disagreeing with everything he wrote, but basically coming to the conclusion that he no longer agreed with his central tenet. And so that kind of triggered our discussion today, as we're going to be kind of discussing, was he right? Was he wrong to recant it? There's still a lot of fans of his book. So stay tuned, keep it locked. We're going to be diving in to that interesting topic today.
We're just talking about the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with the book, so I Kissed Dating Goodbye is a book. Joshua Harris wrote the book in like 1997, and basically he's just talking about how he found the worldly dating system to be really problematic. So he was trying to introduce a way for like Christians to go against the grain and not fall into some of the dangers of dating, and then kind of have like guiding principles about how they should be approaching relationships. So ultimately in the book, he talks about like 7 principles of bad dating and how to not fall into that. But then he also talks about the heart and the spirit behind dating and how Christians should be looking to treat one another. He introduces this principle of having selfless love, where in every interaction that you're having with your brother or sister in Christ, that you are thinking about it from a place of selflessness as opposed to just trying to get what you want out of dating relationships. He also talks about like guarding your heart. He talks about like what your thought pattern should be, what your interactions with you and the person that you're talking to and your church community, how you should be interacting with them. So he basically just talks about like the spirit and the heart behind what your interaction should be with people of the opposite sex.
Yeah, and the reason why this is such a big topic is because the book really took off when he wrote it and essentially created this. Probably didn't create it, but it basically made popular this idea of quote unquote purity culture, which is basically a culture of how a lot of Christians or just people in Christendom dated, or at least felt like, you know, how they were directed to date. And really, this is something that, I mean, I read the book randomly when I was like 21.
Yeah,
I didn't think anyone
hugely
knew about this book.
Yeah.
And then I found out actually like a lot of people have read this book. It actually has informed and impacted a lot of people at a really formative time of their life. So for him to recant it is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's huge because I came to faith early 2000s. And I think that was around the time where the book had kind of cemented itself in the culture, in the evangelical kind of culture. And I got immersed into that culture pretty early on in my faith, being introduced to certain theologians and pastors. And so that purity culture was really kind of heavy in the church. And so I came into the church hearing things like, guard your brothers and sisters' hearts, and like, watch how you date. And I think it was in many ways a reaction to a lot of the craziness we see in the dating world, a lot of the selfishness we see in the dating world. But I think Joshua Harris has come to the point that maybe he overreacted to that stuff, and he put out a piece of work that probably set up a lot of legalistic tendencies in how to approach dating. And in the wrong hands, I think it was used to kind of really restrict people's approach to romance. And there have been people who have commented of how the book hurt them. And so Joshua Harris, he put out a TED Talk. So it's been a process of a few years, I think, of rethinking the book. This wasn't just a fly-by-night decision to recant the book. I think I saw an interview as early as 2016 on NPR where he was kind of talking about rethinking the book. And so it's been a process of him kind of reevaluating his ideas and taking the time. Because, I mean, I would imagine that recanting a book that sold, I don't know, probably how many millions of copies.
Mm-hmm. It was millions of copies, translated in multiple different languages.
Yeah.
Worldwide.
That's when you know.
Yeah.
When your book gets translated, that's when you...
Yeah, it was a huge book. So it could not have been an easy process to come to the conclusion that I was wrong about the central tenet of my book and I need to recant it. But he did a TED Talk talking about how the purpose of the talk was to give advice on how to come to a place of humility, admitting that you're wrong. But he talked about the book, and he talked about how, it hurt people and how he needed to recant. And now I think there's a documentary that's out as well, talking about it. So I just really wanted to read the statement he put out, because this statement was basically him saying, I'm now going to take the book out of print. Right. So it wasn't now that he just thinks he disagrees with the idea. I think he's come to the point where he thinks it's genuinely harmful. And so just a snippet of the statement he put out a few weeks ago. He says, while I stand by my book's call to sincerely love others, my thinking has changed significantly in the past 20 years. I no longer agree with its central idea that dating should be avoided. I now think dating can be a healthy part of a person developing relationally and learning the qualities that matter most in a partner. So, and then he ends that statement by basically saying, I'm taking the book out of print. So,
yeah. And so, I mean, the conversation around this book is pretty huge, because really for Harris, he was coming up at a time where there was a bunch of different things happening in the country. For one, this is like, after a bunch of decades of kind of like a lot of traditional community and family structures kind of dissolving or shifting. And so really, if you look at people today, whether they're Christian or not, everyone's still trying to recover and figure out, how do we meet spouses? How do you partner with people? How do you build a family? No one really seems to have a great answer in America to do that.
Yeah.
And then secondly, it was also part of really a time where Christendom, I want to say that instead of Christians, was really responding to the fact that America was a post-Christian nation. And so how are we gonna be in the world, right, when we're kind of like the culture doesn't assume that? And so I mean, there's so much wrapped up in this. And do one of you guys want to maybe define, because he used a lot of words which are kind of specific to his book, define what he means by dating and define what he means by courtship,
Yeah, just to even talk about the scope that goes along with this book. Like, this book is attributed with introducing the word courting into culture.
Yeah.
Like, from this book, people now have defined their interactions as, oh, I'm courting this person.
Yeah.
So basically what Joshua Harris talks about is like dating is where you are just meeting multiple different people and you're going into it just trying to have fun. Like, you might just be hanging out, but you don't have necessarily a commitment to this person, and you don't have an intentional decision to see if you will get married to this person. You're just spending time together. You may be falling into sexual sin. There may be physical interactions, but you're not necessarily driving towards having some sort of marital commitment. Whereas courtship is more so defined as a friendship between two Christian people who have decided that the intention of our coming together is for us to see if we should end in marriage.
Yeah. And he defined dating as intrinsically flawed. Dating was not seen as something that could become flawed, or depending on who was dating, it could be a bad thing or it could be a good thing. Like, the book takes the position that the framework of dating inevitably it promotes selfishness. It promotes putting yourself in situations where you can lead other people on, become emotionally bonded before there's any real commitment, and obviously end in sexual immorality. So he has an intrinsically negative view of dating, and that's what he puts forward. And now he's seemingly changed his mind on that. So,
yeah. So basically what you're saying is that he wasn't looking for a better way to date. He was saying the institution of dating was wrong, period, and we need to find an alternative.
At one point in the book, he talks about being in a youth group, and there was a pastor who was talking about two people who dated, and that pastor talked about how they end up falling in sexual sin, and the pastor's point was like how they should have avoided sexual sin. But he was talking about, in his mind, he was like, why didn't the pastor radically, like, criticize the institution of dating in the first place as the thing that led up to them being in sexual immorality? So it's a more radical approach to dating. So
okay. Well, that being said, I mean, I read this book at a time where I was 20, 21. I was trying to figure out
I think we've all read the book at
the same time. Yeah. And this was a time where I was trying to figure out what it looks like to apply my faith to my life, but also a time where I was asking a lot of questions about what does it look like to date and to build relationships and stuff. And frankly, there's quite a lot of stuff that I found fruitful. And so maybe a good place for us to start the discussion would be, before we kind of get into his recanting and kind of like what we disagree with the book and kind of where we're on the same page with him, what were some things from the book that you guys found helpful?
Yeah, I mean, when I found the book, I think I was also in my early 20s, maybe like 21. I had just made the decision of I am going to follow Christ and I'm going to try to live my life according to the tenets of the Bible. So in coming to find this book, it's like, okay, I'm a young single woman, I'm a Christian. Like, how do I now interact with men in the church? And I think what I found most fruitful from the book was the idea that I shouldn't be interacting with people out of a sense of selfishness. Like, I shouldn't just be trying to get from this relationship. Like, I should really be thinking about others. I mean, the Bible says to think of others more highly than yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the major principles that came out. And I mean, there's a lot with this book, but it definitely helped me, to switch over from some ratchet ways over to some righteous ways. Like, there was definitely put down the mantle of ratchet and put on the mantle of righteous. It definitely helped me make that switch. So the guiding principle of selfless love was definitely helpful.
Yeah, seeing my fallingness and knowing where I was when it came to relationships with the opposite sex, I was like, nah, this is not really good. Because I had just came out of a year relationship, my first open relationship with the guy, and we had broken off, and I was heartbroken everywhere. And so I picked up this book and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the way I should be trying to do things now. And I mean, from what I took for it mainly was, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And so we're supposed to love the same way. Like that was kind of like the main principle that really got anchored to. And like he quotes John 4, like, this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son, an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And I think taking that as a guiding principle when it comes to relationships is very important, and it does radically change how you interact with just people in general. And so for relationships, especially when you get into like things that are going to be pretty intimate, like the deep down, sacred things in your life, you have to be careful with those things, and also very sincere and just very intentional on how you approach that with someone else. And I think that's a great guiding principle when it comes to relationships with someone else.
Yeah, man. I mean, nothing beats the law of love. Jesus said it himself, treat others as you want to be treated. And I think that principle for so long in the culture has been lost. I mean, you see so many examples of that. You listen to all your favorite songs and it's like, Drake is like, she asks, do you love me? I only say partly. I only, so it's almost,
I'm on raps.
I mean, like the reality is just this idea of like, I'm with you, but I don't really care. Like, it's just a selfishness that's in the culture. Mm-hmm. And so coming out of that space where people are always using people, like there's the one I'm committed with, and then there's the side chick. And it's just this idea of people are just there for use. Reading a book like this can be a total breath of fresh air. It's like, oh my goodness, wait a minute. Like, this law of love is supposed to be in the realm of romantic relationships. Right. And I think people kind of theoretically know that, but the culture is so toxic that that's just not the everyday experience.
It's not practical.
It's not. It's not what we do. And people don't experience that. And so you read a book like this, and it's talking about love. It's talking about care. It's talking about not using people. People are coming from a place of heartbreak, and the book is really refreshing in that way because now it's giving you an alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. I mean, when I kind of heard that this was all going down. And like, people were kind of clapping back at Josh Harris, or he was really clapping back at himself, retroactively
he accepted
or something.
the clapbacks.
But I mean, I think it's really easy to like pile on or punch down at like Joshua Harris. Yeah, but I mean, honestly, when I read this book, I think the biggest thing for me that was helpful or I found compelling was like this idea that there should be a level of intentionality to dating.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, I had never really been introduced to that principle. It was basically like, if we're vibing in the moment, let's just continue and hang out more and just see where things go. And the idea of just having some thoughtfulness, or even kind of just to bounce off what you said, even just considering where the other person might be at, as opposed to kind of like self-preserving yourself and always kind of playing chess with like a relationship. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of revolutionary for me to hear. And I think, especially being someone that didn't have any type of role models in relationships speaking into my life on that topic, I was like, all right, I'm going to scoop this up and hang my hat on it, because it was like just someone actually giving some sort of guidance in that direction. So, yeah.
And I think even the fact that he talks so much about examining your own heart and like knowing what your motivations
like introspection.
are. Like I think that definitely is helpful. And like if you are approaching relationships, you need to know where you are. You need to know like what is driving you, what your motives. And I think like that definitely helps you as a person think about, why am I entering this sphere? Why am I getting into a dating relationship? So that I'm clear-hearted and then I don't project any issues or project any of things that I haven't resolved in my heart onto another person.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that was all well and good. And, I guess if the conversation ended there, we'd all be in a great space. But
Josh Harris could still make money off
he could still make money
ebook, but now he got to make money off whatever book he gonna write in Canada.
He wrote a couple books, so he still got some money coming in.
He's good.
And the documentary, you got to pay for it, right, or something more.
I think you could watch it for free.
Okay.
Maybe as a suggested
Support 'em,
donation. Who knows, man?
But the reality is that the book was hurtful for a lot of people. And a lot of people talked about the book being not necessarily viewed as a principle that people should follow, or maybe, I don't know, eating the meat, separating the bones, or whatever the case may be, like this sense of the spirit of the law, but that it was actually really legalistic, and like it was used to beat people over the head, and it was used to set up an oppressive purity culture. So I wanted to, I guess we could dive into that and kind of discuss that. And I don't know if we're all on the same page. We had a little pre-discussion going, and I think people have varying levels of disagreement.
We literally have popcorn because we're ready to popcorn disagree on this.
So we're so just to stay, we're all not in the equal place of disagreement with the book, but we have to talk about the fact that people have disagreed with it. So, I mean, I guess I could start. I mean, I think as I was rereading the book, so I kind of re-dove in, and I began to just listen to, just think about certain things. And what I got as I reread this book is, and he mentioned this himself as he was, I think it may have been in his TED Talk, how a lot of this book was written from a place of fear. A lot of this book was written from a place of, we are in a culture where there's rampant sexual immorality. There is rampant, like people getting their heart broken, all kinds of things taking place. And so how do you curtail all of this from taking place? Let's set up a system that can protect people. And while that is an innocent desire, actually a good desire, it can lead to people sort of, it can lead to putting in rules and boundaries in place that can actually be harmful. So for me, as I was rereading it, there was lots of, I don't want to say fear mongering. That's too extreme. But he really over and over again, he had examples in the book of things happening tragically, people who are in dating relationships. And I'm like, is this a fair assessment of dating? And, is it always the case that if I'm in a date or going on a date with somebody and I'm alone, it's going to lead to these feelings, it's going to lead to this heartbreak? And maybe he would have said no, even at the time, but it was just not this fair picture being put forward on dating and some of the benefits that could come from dating. And you come away reading that book relating to people, even quite frankly on a friendship level. If that friendship level could lead to something romantic, you come away feeling like, I have to really question how I interact with the opposite sex. If I have these romantic feelings, if I'm in a dating relationship, there's all this paranoia that can come up. And it created a sense of like, am I disobeying God? Am I in a bad place? Is this, unwise to be in a dating relationship? And I think that was, in my assessment, like a fear-based sort of way of approaching dating.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
See, I kind of err on the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Okay.
All right, Varlene.
And so I get it. It's not always a great place to start, but it is a place to start. And if you are truly seeking and pursuing God, eventually you will get to a place in your maturity where you're able to do the whole separating the, eating the meat and spitting the bones. And so for me, I just feel like him making those illustrations, like, kind of made his points, like it illuminated those points more for me, to see the seriousness of these faulty parts of dating, which I was practicing. And so I don't really see anything wrong. I can see why in other circles, if that's what you grew up in and God wasn't really like the center of your life, and I'm not saying, I wouldn't say center of your life, but it was something that you got from your parents. You know, I think those were the circles
So
that
if you grew up in like a
you
like a
grew
Bible
up in the
Belt
church.
culture.
It was Bible Belt
Yeah,
culture.
like a Pharisaical almost culture.
God wasn't really like this. Faith wasn't really yours. It was something that you kind of inherited. You kind of haven't really chewed up yourselves. I feel like that's sometimes where that pitfall of purity culture being so oppressive. That's where you're gonna start feeling that way. But for me, it wasn't that, because like I didn't grow up in that type of circle. So me being out there, it was more of me. It like hearing this and reading this gave me more of the incentive to look at what I was doing in light of what Scripture was saying. You know, not just what Joshua Harris was saying, but what Scripture was saying. And so to say that these things were oppressive, I think is going a little far. But yeah,
I'm gonna go that far. I'm gonna tiptoe into that, like that oppressive state of like, yeah, I'm on the other side of like I respectfully disagree with you in that saying like, yes, the Bible does say the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but he doesn't say the fear of man is to stop you from doing everything in your life. And that ultimately is where a lot of this book was used to beat people over the head of like, as someone who did go to a church where boys and girls couldn't sit next to each other, you couldn't look at each other. If you sit next to a boy, you're gonna get pregnant. So it's that kind of like fear mongering that they, you know, tell people like, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. And while the spirit of Joshua Harris's book is like, you should, you know, think before you act, you should examine your heart, you should follow the principles of the Bible, people took this book and told women like, you must dress modestly because you are going to cause your brother to sin if you are dressed in a certain way. It is your fault if a man is lusting after you. It is your fault if you even look at a man, because then now you're automatically sinning with him. Like even the idea of attraction to a man becomes dirty. And there have been people who have lived in the purity culture who they stayed quote unquote pure. They didn't date. They didn't, you know, talk to people of the opposite sex. And then when they got married, they can't have, you know, fruitful sex in their marriages because they've seen sex as dirty and wrong, and interactions with men and women as wrong. So there definitely was a lot of oppression that came from the book and a lot of victimization that happened. And while it started off from a good place, like the people who took this book and then made it gospel, made it law, they did bind a lot of people. They put millstones around people's necks and, you know, choked them in a lot of their interactions.
Well, I would agree. See, well, now I would agree.
Oh, we got a debate going. Okay.
I would agree with your whole, like, with the whole, like, it being oppressive in that space. Yeah, I don't think that you should be doing that with a book and holding it over people's heads and, you know, thumping them, you know, with it. But I would say, like, looking at the principles and how he set it up, I don't think there was really anything wrong. What people did with it now and how they
interpreted it
and applied it, right,
Yeah.
I think is, no, don't do that. You know, the whole, like, I don't agree with the whole whatever you wear, like, you're the reason why this guy is sinning situation. Like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that's right, but I still don't think the principles that he had were inherently wrong.
He even says in the book, like this, I agree with most of what the book says, but there are parts that definitely give me pause. Like he said, dating can cause discontentment with God's gift of singleness. So it's like, even if I can look at that and now, like, even if I want to meet someone, or it might even be the season where God is like, yeah, like you can talk to someone in order to get married. But I'm now looking at it like, if I even want to talk to someone of the opposite sex, I am going against God's will for my gift of singleness. So even in that sense, it's like, it's going to stop people from that practice of wanting to enter into maybe godly relationships, because like, oh my God, no, if I date someone, I'm going to be discontent and then God is going to hate me and I'm going to be sinning. So it was some of those principles that it stymied and blocked people from the way that they interacted with others in a healthy place, because there was a fear of sinning against God.
But I think if you have a relationship with God and you're like if you're in a real deep relationship with God, like, you know that, okay, it's time for me to go to that place where I am able to talk to someone and pursue this relationship. Now, if you know you're not, then I don't even think you would need Joshua Harris's book to tell you that. You would know with your relationship with God that this is not a place that I should be pursuing right now.
I mean, but that presumes on a sense of like that every person that is in the church has been groomed and cultivated to know what the voice of God is for themselves, or what that healthy relationship sounds like. If you grow up in a church where the authoritative figure in the pastor in the front is telling you this is what it is, and he's helping you interpret the Bible from this lens, then the way that you are thinking is going to be shaped from the authority of the pulpit. Even if you then go and read the Bible on your own, you're reading it from a lens that is colored from the people who are leaders over your life that are telling you. So there have been a lot of innocent people who grew up in evangelical churches, or who grew up in the Bible Belt, and they had pastors telling them, you must wear a purity ring, or you must go to this purity celebration, or you must always do it this way. That every single time they read the Bible, their understanding was colored from what the pastor was saying, and they then saw God as not as the loving father that he is, but as a dictator.
Well, from that quote that you just read, it sounds like instead of making the ultimate evil sin and distorting what God said, it made the ultimate evil dating.
Yeah.
And therefore it made the gospel
Don't
courtship. Date. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that so? Varlene, would you agree with that? Would you agree with that assessment from that quote, that was something that it could be interpreted like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think someone can interpret it that way for sure. I guess I'm not at a place where I understand people in those circles, because there's like so many unlimited resources out there for you to expand your lens on the gospel, that this person on the pulpit does not need to be the authoritative person in your life that you view the Bible from. So why would you how could you let that happen?
If I'm 16 years old, I ain't got no choice. Like, if I go to the church that my parents tell me to.
Yeah, I think there's a standpoint of, this is not even something that a lot of people are taking on for themselves, but it's being imposed upon them. And so when you have authority figures in your life now taking this book and saying this is how you should do dating, you really don't really have a choice. And there's some people who could probably willfully take it on and end up being hurt from it if they realize they disagree with it. But a lot of people, it was kind of something that was being put on them. And I do, I kind of more here on the side of what Lourdes was saying. As I read this book, there was this like, dating is opposed to your relationship with God. Like, it's a distraction from your relationship with God. And he talked about, his friend, he gives another example here of a guy named Matt Canlis, who was in a relationship with a woman named Julie Clifton. And, God made it clear to Julie that she had to focus on God, and not be distracted by Matt. And so he passed up on opportunities to not even be around her, not spend any time with her alone. And then he ends that quote by saying he avoided doing anything that could make it harder for Julie to focus on serving God. And it was just a sense in which, like, okay, there's some truth there. I could see how if they were in a heavy dating relationship, it could be a distraction, or maybe, I don't know what was going on in her heart. Maybe she wanted to focus on God, but why would it? The necessary understanding of me being around this person, spending time with this person, has to automatically lead to this person now being disturbed from their relationship with God. Like, if people enter into male-female relationships like that, it's no wonder why in certain aspects of purity culture you see guys on this side, women on this side. Because if you guys both want to love God and serve God, and there's this idea that these romantic relationships could be a distraction from God, then you're not going to want to interact. You're going to want to separate, because you have this idea that okay, well, if I spend time with you, then that means I might end up liking you. And then if I like you, I might want to be in a relationship with you. And that's a distraction from my walk with God. And so I should just love my singleness. And obviously, loving your singleness is a good thing. So you can't totally condemn certain aspects of this book. But the propensity to take that to totally enlarge sort of, unbalanced approach to it, you're going to end up with this situation where it's like, I view dating as a distraction. If I'm in a dating relationship, it could be hurtful and harmful. So, and I think that's kind of a lot of what the book kind of established, that had people regretting that they were involved in it or believed it or followed it.
All of the stories that he tells, I feel like they have a setup where they're going to have like a final destination ending.
Yeah.
Like they were on a roller coaster holding hands, and then the roller coaster flew off. And they both died. They're on the roller coaster together.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sense you got. Like, it's just this fatalistic, like, here's all the terrible examples of dating and how it ended horribly.
But, I mean, I'm coming from a similar background as Varlene, and I could understand where legit, like, growing up in just the dating culture that I was in, it was 10 times more jacked up than anything he talked about in that book. Like the stuff that we got into when we were younger
100.
caused a lot of baggage, scars, wounds, and
100%.
hurt. And so, I mean, I could kind of understand how if you just kind of like picked up the book randomly and you weren't in the Bible Belt and you were just like, here's a book on dating, it's not that harmless. But at the same time, I mean, that wasn't his audience. His audience was people in the Bible Belt all day, and they took this kid and they propped him up.
Right.
And there was kind of like that. Do you have that quote on hand about that girl?
Yeah. So this conversation that this group of people were having about the book, she says,
this was on a panel, right?
Yeah, this was like I think just a regular conversation just on the recantation of the book, and they were asked about their thoughts on his apology, and one girl was like, it's big, like in reference to purity culture, it's bigger than Joshua Harris as big as an impact as he did have. He was a handsome, wholesome popularizer, and he is therefore responsible for his influence in spreading the model. I don't know how much of the model he's reconsidering, if any, but I'm a lot more focused on the system that elevated him and would have found someone else to play that role if he hadn't been willing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the issue is bigger than the book. And I think a lot of people who probably are from this background would say that there was just a culture that essentially idolized marriage, idolized purity. And what we mean by that is that they made that the ultimate thing instead of God.
Right.
And if you're a teenager and you're coming up in that culture and you probably haven't, or maybe haven't processed the gospel or understood what your relationship of God is, then you're basically relating to God through whether or not I'm courting, which is, and so I think we could probably all agree that was something that this added so much fuel to the fire. And I think that woman's right. I think if it wasn't Joshua Harris writing this book, there probably would have been another person that wrote the book. So yeah. Well, this can't be, because it would be like 5 hours long. This isn't a dating 101. Like, we have the vision for dating. We're now going to come off the mountain and deliver it to you guys. But
I have zero vision.
Sure don't. Clearly, ain't been doing it right.
But there's definitely a question that's at the center of this book. There's a question which is at the center of this conversation, which is, according to Joshua Harris in this book, dating is an intrinsically flawed system. And so kind of opening up to your guys' thoughts, is there truth to that? Is that false and dangerous and bad? Is it kind of like half true? Like, what do you guys think?
I think it's half true. I might say all the way true. But
You will say or you will not say?
I'm not going to say, well, see, I'm going to just keep it 100. The real deep inside me wants to say, yes, dating is like inherently bad.
Go ahead, girl. Say it with your chest. Go ahead.
Say it.
Say it.
I'm going to keep it
by
real.
it.
Stand
but
by it.
I ain't going to be on that tip because I know it's not practical to not date, So I'm not going to be that person that's just going to be like, no, you can't date. But, if you ask me personally, I'm gonna say yeah, because
So would you set up like arranged marriages? Is that how you...
Yo, I'm with it. You know, 'cause
Okay.
I think, you know, I don't know. I like to err on the safe side with things, and it's you know what? It's probably just a very fallen part of me as well, where I just maybe it can be based in like my lack of trust in God with certain things, but I think that when it comes to relationships, there's a lot of hurt and pain and selfishness when it comes to dating that I think you really can't avoid, which is why I think it's there's a lot of flaws in it. It's just we can't avoid being fallen people, and so when it comes to being with someone emotionally, spiritually, you're gonna lead to the physical no matter what you do. And
So wait a minute, you're gonna lead to physical, meaning you think is people gonna automatically end up in like sexual relationships? Is that what
I think it happens. Absolutely.
Flag on the play. Flag on the play.
And I think you have your what's the word I'm looking for? I think you have your exceptions, you know, where people are really intentional about it when it comes to dating and saying, I'm gonna be celibate. You know, I think you have your exceptions. I think there are a lot of exceptions, actually. But I'm going to do a generalization that doesn't usually happen. So the sexual aspects is always something that needs to be guarded. And I think dating doesn't allow for that to happen most of the time.
So you are basically 100% in agreement with his premise. And you don't think he should have recanted a single thing about this book?
I think he should. You know, but like I said,
Just keep it real. You feeling it? You feeling it?
Because I think we need to be intentional about these things, but it has to be. I think it has to be grounded on like a real love for the other, like for people, right? And a real love for people. So if it's something that you're just doing because this is the right thing to do, this is what I need to do, you know, then the motivation behind it is not, it's not sincere, it's not real, and it's gonna come off very tacky. You know what I'm saying? But if it's real and you're really doing it for the love of the person, then it's gonna come off a little bit more genuine. Even if it comes off corny, it's gonna come off genuine, it's gonna come off real, and people gonna know your vibes. But if it's not, then it's gonna come off real tacky. It's gonna come off.
So one more question, because it's not an interrogation. I just wanted to ask you, how then, if dating is not supposed to be something that Christians engage in, how do we then enter into relationships and enter into marriage? Just because, I mean, I made a joke about, you know, giving, you know, arranged marriages, but we're not in a culture that does that, right?
Right.
What is the alternative you would present then? How do people get to know each other, enter into some sort of relationship that is, I don't know, maybe courting, I guess, and then...
I think so. I think learning of someone in community can happen.
Okay.
I don't think we need to be in
one-on-one...
one-on-one situations. And I'm not saying that's not what I've done it. I've done the one-on-one.
Okay.
And that's why I say I can't like be all way on the air of no, you can't date, because I've done it. And yes, I have had relationships that have flourished because of it. But yeah, I think it can be done in community. I think we can go out together with other friends and other people who are on the same page with us and learn of that person in that way. And then if we do see that, yeah, okay, we're interested in each other, or I'm interested and I don't know if he's interested, then I would share. I wouldn't be on the sly or on the slick and just kind of always want to be around this person and be awkward and stuff. You know, being honest and true and doing things in community, I think can really happen. I think when we get in the when we get older, like, you know, in the 20s, 30s, it's like, it seems so impractical. People got no time. I ain't trying to be around a whole group of people all the time. That's just to see this one person. You know what I mean? But I think it can happen. And I'm not sure, but I think, right, like in biblical times, things were done in a community. So my mom knew old boy, you know, my brother knew old boy. Like everybody knew this person, his character, who he was. So me being interested in him or us coming together wasn't going to be so awkward, and it wasn't going to be something so hard to do, like in spaces where other people were always around.
Okay.
Sis, I might need to take your advice because you married out here and I'm single as so I might need to listen to you. But I mean, I disagree, but I'm not. I mean, I could, but I'm not. But like, I agree that Christian couples should interact with one another in community. I think that whatever you do should be done in light. There should be accountability. Your pastor should know. Your church community should know. Your parents should know. Like somebody should be checking in on you, like what's going on. But I really disagree with the premise that you and I going to get coffee is going to end with, you know, a menage on the table. Like it doesn't have to always be that anytime two people are together, they are going to fall into sexual sin. And I think like that's part of the fear mongering that happens. So then you have men and women in the church who don't approach each other or who don't say anything of like, well, I'm just going to hold back my feelings. So even though I'm attracted to this person, I'm attracted to this brother, I'm attracted to this sister, I'm not going to say anything because the second that she and I go, you know, to the coffee shop, we're going to sin and we're going to falter. So,
I mean, I think that whole like going as far as menage, I don't think that's even the issue. I think the emotional aspects, the feelings that get involved, that is something to be guarded from as well. Like, just
I mean, I don't have to fall in love with you because we're sharing a scone. Like, it's not like, oh, like I'm planning my wedding because you looked at me.
Girls do it.
And you know what? I have been guilty of it too. Like, I know that happens, but it doesn't always have to happen every single time. Like, it doesn't have to go there. It can really just be like, you know what? I heard you was cool. Like, let's go see if we could be cool together. And then, okay, nope. Now let's go on these community dates because we are feeling each other. Let's get everybody else in. But it doesn't always have to be 16 people at TGI Fridays for us to just be like, oh, you know, like, come on.
I think guys do the same thing. There's this movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey. I don't know if y'all ever saw that, but basically like at the beginning of the movie, he's taking a train to Montauk and he sees Kate Winslet, and the first line of the movie is,
"Why do I fall in love with every woman I see who shows me the least bit of attention?"
Right. And it's like you're on the like people do that on the subway.
People do it.
But all that being said, like I don't think the answer to that is not dating.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that is really growing in wisdom, growing in kind of like maturity to be able to process dating in a way that honors God and honors the other person. I mean, but the big problem is, and you alluded to this, is that dating wasn't an institution when the Bible was written, so the Bible's silent on it. But I don't think it therefore institutionalizes courtship. I just think that now we have to do the hard work of wrestling through what is God, how would God have us date?
Yeah, what's wise and unwise in the situation.
Right.
One thing I thought about, and this is like my recent thoughts, so I'm not even going to teach this as gospel, but a reoccurring kind of critique on dating that he put forward was what you mentioned, Varlene, the emotions that come up and the potential for heartbreak. And that is this sort of premature giving of yourself to people. And that could lead into real and true hurt when the dating relationship doesn't go through. And to me, I was like, that's true and good. And obviously we want to be wise about entering into bad relationships that's almost inevitably going to lead into hurt. Like there's situations that are very clearly not going to be good for certain people. So I certainly think not every dating situation is equal. But the reality is that heartbreak is something that is inevitable. And I would say, even if something ends in marriage, there could be heartbreak in the relationship, heartbreak in the marriage. And so this idea of wanting to protect yourself from heartbreak, I'm wondering if that is something that is really sort of this a result of a culture that really sees its own happiness and self-preservation as ultimate. Because the reality is that I don't know if we often have a biblical view of pain and heartbreak and how God uses pain and heartbreak, and how pain and heartbreak can actually be good things and can remind us of the one who is supposed to always be our all in all. And so I speak from my own experience, because I have been let down by pursuit of women before and had a tremendous amount of heartbreak, and have had to wrestle with closing myself off emotionally and that sort of thing. And it's because no one wants to get their heart broken. That's just makes sense. Like, no one obviously walks into heartbreak, but the reality is that I don't know, if you get to a place where you're always trying to protect yourself from heartbreak, you could be closing yourself off to something good. And I don't even know if that's something that's even possible to do. Like, heartbreak and disappointment happens. And I would say that heartbreak might actually end up being a good thing, something that is used by God. So my point there is, I wasn't with Joshua Harris's fear that we need to be avoiding this heartbreak. Like, I'm not so sure that's something that should always be avoided, as he put it in the book. So that's some of my thoughts as I was processing through what he wrote.
But about but I feel like heartbreak in the realm of pursuing romance outside of commitment.
Okay. Well, I would say I do think that if you are averse to the idea of commitment in general, then I think you shouldn't be dating. I would agree. Like, if you're someone who has no desire to get married, you ain't looking for quote unquote the one, then you're entering into dating relationships haphazardly, and that just could lead to a lot of needless heartbreak. But if you have that honest intention of commitment, the reality is that you could set up the most, like, I've seen some of the most thoroughbred, like, people coming from Christian homes, love Jesus, they seem like a perfect fit, and it ends in heartbreak. Like, it's almost unavoidable. I've seen people get married and it looked like their marriage was great and they had every reason to get married, and then it ends in divorce. And so when does it end? Like, when does trying to prevent yourself from heartbreak end? Because theoretically, we don't know the future.
Right.
Yeah.
Any relationship can end in heartbreak.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of, like, God in the Bible, he says that I'm close to the brokenhearted. And, like, love ultimately is an act in vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot pursue love without understanding, like, there is a good chance that I can be hurt. And that message is in the gospel. Like, Christ pursued us and then we crucified him. Like, we're breaking
God's heart all the time.
And he shows that, like, when you put yourself out there for someone, there is that great chance that they can be vulnerable. Like, I have there's this poem that I love by W.B. Yeats, The Cloths of Heaven, and he says, I have spread my dreams under your feet, tread softly because you tread on my dreams. And there's that idea of, like, I'm putting forth, like, my heart, I'm giving you this part of myself, and I'm asking you to be careful with it. But the author also understands there's that risk of, like, because I've given you that, you could stomp all over my dreams and you can stomp all over my heart. But I don't know that that's, like, saying, like, I never am going to get hurt, if that is, like, even being fully human or actualizing that sense of, like, self and, like, fully truly loving, because to love is to be vulnerable and possibly open up yourself to hurt. I know, like, the Bible also says to guard your heart, but at the same time, it doesn't say put Fort Knox around your heart.
Bars. Okay. Lord is dropping major keys. So thinking about this thing and thinking about what, Joshua Harris's recant meant, I think a really good takeaway is it's important to really not put yourself out there until you've really thought through a lot of things. I mean, he wrote this book when he was a young man, and I always think about Tim Keller's advice that you should only be writing books in your 50s. Now, I'm not sure if I totally agree that you should wait till you're 50 to write a book, but there's wisdom in this idea that, I always think about God's admonition to teachers. Like before you become a teacher, you should think, because you're going to be judged harshly, right? This idea that, you speak on things authoritatively, and it could potentially lead people astray. It could be hurtful. It could be harmful. Yeah. So, and it's good for Joshua Harris to be owning up to that and recognizing that, for a lot of people, whether it's actually what he wrote in his book or how people interpreted the book or used the book, for him to be owning up to that is a good thing. But I think it just serves as anyone who is who's involved in content creation, people who are involved in shaping people's ideas. That could even be something that we think about as a podcast, that as we present our ideas, that it should be well thought out, it should be prayed over, because we don't want to be leading people astray. We don't want to cause unnecessary hurt, unnecessary harm. And it's, God gives grace for us to repent and be open about the ways we have misled others, whether intentionally or not. But it is a good reminder to really be thinking about, like, don't starve for the platform so much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the starving for the platform.
Don't chase the clout.
Don't chase the clout. Because he talked about it in his TED Talk. He was young, he was ambitious, he was zealous, and those things kind of led him to writing a book. And now he's got to kind of recant and take it back, right? So that's a good lesson for us. Like, before you are, eager to put yourself out there, to really think it through, run your ideas by people, think in processing community. And look, that doesn't mean that it's a foolproof plan. You might just have to say something and take it back. But all in all, having that humility to do so is important.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. And for those of you who are listening in, and you are maybe new to this discussion, or this is the first time you've come in contact with this book, or maybe you're in a place where we were in our early 20s, where we were just trying to figure out dating. This is by no means a comprehensive discussion on dating from scripture. I mean, it's pretty much not that at all. This is definitely very much an in-house conversation, which we're glad that you guys are listening into. But, if you are looking for good resources, TMZ actually just ran this article where they saw Justin Bieber walking out of a building with Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller. And let me tell you something, that book is actually fire.
Shouts out to the Bieber.
Shout out to him, man.
Yo, I be joking on him, but he's really a believer out here. I need to stop.
Those kids, I hope they make it. But I found that to be a great resource. I don't know if you guys have any suggestions that you want to throw down.
Oh, Momentary Marriage by John Piper is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tells you how to pursue relationships.
No, I mean, you just going to recommend I Kiss Dating Goodbye because in European, ain't nothing wrong with it.
Okay.
Like, yo, I recommend you read Joshua Harris's I Kiss Dating Goodbye.
You can't find it no more. So if you want the book, hit me up, son. I got it on my Kindle, all right?
Yeah. Yo, they ain't selling them anymore, but if you talk to Marlene, she's got them on the black market.
I'm sure I can find my copy with all my highlights in it.
You got to meet her on the corner.
She is now the plug for that book.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I think just admiring his humility. I respect the fact that he was big enough to say, like, yo, like, I was wrong. Where, like, all the ideas in his book might not necessarily be wrong, but he definitely is a model for a lot of the church to follow. Of, like, I put forth thoughts and I put forth things that impacted other people, so I repent of it, which the evangelical church might want to follow suit.
The white evangelical space.
Evangelicals.
Yeah,
holler at your boy Joshua Harris.
Yeah, like, just take back the whole statement on social justice and the gospel. Just a lot of stuff needs to be recanted in that space. All right, guys. So thank you for listening in. We appreciate your time. Hope that you guys continue to just be blessed of God. This is Bryant the Theological Giant signing out.
This is Lordess the Principal, a.k.a. the Woman with Principal.
Varlene the Wild Thornberry.
And Young Nassau County.
All right, we'll see you in the next one.
Peace.